The colony at Saren's Reach stopped transmitting on a Tuesday. I remember that detail because it was the kind of detail that should not have mattered. Colonies go dark for any number of reasons: solar interference, relay degradation, a regional power failure that takes down the comm array for a few hours. Saren's Reach had a population of 1.4 million spread across 2 continents of a temperate world in the Varanthi corridor, 3 relay hops from the nearest naval station. It was not a frontier outpost. It was not a military installation. It was a mid-tier colony with a university, a fisheries export economy, and a children's hospital that had just opened its 3rd wing. The kind of place you forgot existed until someone reminded you. The silence lasted 9 days before Lieutenant Sierra Vance's patrol frigate, the Heron Strand, made the scheduled flyby and found the comm array intact, the orbital stations powered, the atmospheric readings normal, and the colony empty. Not destroyed, not damaged, empty. I received her initial report at Fleet Command on Ashfall Station, where I was overseeing a routine refit cycle for the 6th Logistics Group. Vance was 26 years old, competent, not prone to alarm. Her report was 4 paragraphs long and entirely factual. She described the colony's infrastructure as operational, power grids active, water treatment cycling, atmospheric processors maintaining nominal output, agricultural systems still running on their seasonal schedules, fields of grain moving in the wind with no one to harvest them. The streets of the primary settlement, Saren's Descent, were clean. The buildings were intact, doors were closed, vehicles were parked in neat rows along residential corridors. There was food in refrigeration units, clothing in wardrobes, personal effects on nightstands. In one residential block, she found a table set for dinner, 4 plates, 4 glasses, napkins folded, a bottle of local wine opened and half poured, and the meal had never been served. The kitchen was cold. The oven had been preheating when its timer expired and shut itself off. The bread inside was cooked to charcoal, and the smoke alarm had discharged and reset, and no one had come. In the colony's main transit terminal, the departure board still showed the morning schedule. Commuter shuttles to the agricultural zones, a freight run to Orbital Station 3, a school transport to the university campus. All of them listed as departed. None of them had returned. Vance found the shuttles parked at their destinations, doors open, interiors empty, the automated navigation logs showing completed routes with 0 passenger disembarkation events. The shuttles had arrived at their stops. No one had gotten off, because no one had been on them. The colony's transit system had run its full morning schedule, ferrying empty vehicles to empty stations across a world where 1.4 million people had ceased to exist. There were no bodies, no blood, no signs of struggle. No damage to any structure. No orbital bombardment scarring, no radiation signatures, no chemical residue, no evidence of weapons discharge at any frequency. The colony had not been attacked. It had been emptied. Every human being, every man, woman, and child was gone, and the world they had built continued to function as though it were patiently waiting for them to come back. Vance's final line read, "Requesting guidance. I do not have a classification for this." Neither did I. I dispatched a full investigative task force within 6 hours. 3 intelligence ships, a forensic survey vessel, 2 xenolinguistic analysis platforms, a marine security detachment of 400, and the heavy cruiser Talvin's Gate as escort. I sent Captain Darren Ash to lead it, because Ash was the most methodical officer I had ever served with, a man who cataloged evidence the way other people breathed, and because whatever had happened at Saren's Reach was not going to be solved by instinct or assumption. It was going to be solved by procedure. The task force arrived 11 days after Vance's initial report. In the intervening time, she had expanded her survey to 16 settlements across both continents. The finding was the same everywhere: operational infrastructure, no human life, no remains. In the university district, lecture halls still had course schedules posted on display boards. The faculty lounge had a coffee machine cycling through its cleaning protocol, the filter basket loaded with grounds that had dried to powder. In the hospital's third wing, the one that had opened 4 months earlier, there were patient charts on clipboards, medication dispensers stocked and sealed, monitoring equipment cycling through standby protocols waiting for patients who would never arrive. The neonatal ward had 7 bassinets prepared. None had been used. One had a blanket folded in the shape of a rabbit. Someone had done that by hand, one fold at a time, and left it there for a child who would never see it. Ash's team spent 41 days on the ground. They surveyed the colony meter by meter. They mapped every structure, opened every door, cataloged every room. They ran soil samples, atmospheric profiles, and biometric scans of every surface that might have carried trace biological material. They found nothing. No human DNA outside of what you would expect from a lived-in space. No foreign biological material. No residual chemical agents. The colony was clean. Not clean in the way a crime scene is clean, scrubbed and bleached and emptied of evidence. Clean in the way a house is clean when the owners leave for the afternoon and expect to come back. What they did find was data. Administrative records buried in the colony's municipal servers, filed in a language that took our linguistic teams 9 days to fully decode. The file headers used a classification system that cross-referenced to no known diplomatic registry. When the decryption was complete, Ash transmitted the results to me, and I read the header line, and the language belonged to the Vandren Consortium. I had heard of the Consortium. Most fleet officers had, in the way you hear about a nation 3 borders removed from your own, a name on a chart, a footnote in a briefing, an entry in the diplomatic register that someone else managed. The Vandren Consortium was an 11,000-year-old interstellar polity that occupied a volume of space roughly 40 light-years spinward of the Varanthi corridor. 31 systems. A population that had peaked at approximately 9,006,000 years ago and had been declining steadily since, now numbering around 2.3 billion. They were not a military power. They were not an expansionist state. They were, by every metric in our files, a civilization in its late autumn, refined, insular, and slowly fading. Their diplomatic contact with Earth's colonial administration had been limited to 3 trade discussions over the previous century, none of which had produced an agreement, and none of which had raised any particular concern. What Ash's team found in the municipal servers was not a trade agreement. It was a project file. The consortium had designated it the Remembrance Protocol. The file was 800 pages long. I read every one. The Remembrance Protocol was, in the consortium's own terminology, a cultural preservation initiative. Its stated purpose was the comprehensive archival of the lived experience of the human population of Saren's Reach, a full-spectrum neural-sensory record of individual consciousness, preserved in perpetuity for the enrichment of the consortium's cultural holdings. The project had been conducted over a period of 8 months, beginning 14 months before the colony went silent. It had been presented to the colony's civic administration as a cultural exchange program, free neurological assessment, shared memory research, a collaborative human consortium archive of lived experience that would benefit both species and deepen interstellar understanding. The civic administration had agreed. They had signed a memorandum of cooperation. There were minutes from 3 council meetings in the file, each one showing unanimous approval. The council chair had called it a meaningful step toward interspecies cultural dialogue. The university's anthropology department had assigned 2 researchers to the project as liaisons. The Children's Hospital had offered its neurological imaging suite as a secondary processing site. And over the course of 8 months, every resident of Saren's Reach, all 1,407,223 of them, had undergone what the consortium's file described as comprehensive neural sensory imprinting. The process was irreversible. I need to be precise about what that means, because the precision is the horror. The Consortium's imprinting technology did not copy a mind, it extracted it. The neural sensory imprint was not a duplicate, it was a transfer. The process mapped the complete architecture of an individual's consciousness. Every memory, every sensory experience, every dream, every moment of fear or joy or boredom or love, the smell of a particular morning, the weight of a child held for the first time, the ache of a loss that never fully faded and wrote it into the Consortium's archival medium. What remained in the human body after the transfer was not a person. It was tissue. The body continued to breathe. The heart continued to beat. The autonomic systems maintained basic function. But the consciousness, the self, the lived experience, the thing that made a person was gone, resident in the Consortium's storage arrays, filed. The Consortium's project file referred to the post-transfer bodies as post-archival biological residue, Category 7, Subcategory Organic Matter, Routine Disposal. The disposal had been conducted via mobile thermal reduction units brought to the colony for that purpose. The units had been removed when the project was complete. The disposal schedule was included in the file's logistics appendix, organized by settlement and date. It was efficient. 14 days for the entire colony. The thermal reduction units had processed approximately 100,000 bodies per day. The file included a quality assurance appendix. The appendix noted that 17 imprints had suffered minor data corruption during transfer, primarily in the olfactory and proprioceptive channels. These 17 were flagged for archival review but retained in the collection with a notation. Experiential fidelity degraded. Recommends supplemental acquisition from comparable population if opportunity arises. The appendix expressed satisfaction with the overall fidelity rate, 99.9988%. It recommended the remembrance protocol for application to other human settlements of comparable population density and cooperative civic infrastructure. It recommended application to other human settlements. That line is the one that sits in me still, not the thermal reduction schedule, not the disposal category, the recommendation, the quiet, administrative assumption that this was a pilot program and that its success justified expansion. Dr. Solon Care, the task force's chief neurological specialist, reviewed the technical documentation and confirmed that the extraction process was exactly what the Consortium described. Care had spent 22 years studying neural architecture. She had published the foundational papers on human consciousness mapping that half the fleet's medical corps had been trained on. She told me, in a voice that was perfectly level and perfectly empty, that the Consortium had developed a technology that could drain a human mind the way you drain a fuel cell, completely, cleanly, and with no possibility of reversal or reconstruction. The imprints stored in the Consortium's archives were not alive. They were recordings. They could be played back, experienced by a Consortium citizen the way you might experience a piece of music. The colonist's wedding day, the colonist's childhood, the colonist's last afternoon in the garden before the extraction appointment, the way the light came through the kitchen window. But the recording did not know it was being played. It did not feel. It did not think. It was data. The colonists were dead. They had been dead from the moment the transfer was complete. The bodies that had walked out of the extraction facilities and returned to their homes to set tables for dinners that would never be served, those were not people. They were residue, still warm, still breathing, waiting for the Consortium's disposal teams to finish their shift schedules. Care told me one more thing that I have not been able to set down in the years since. The extraction process was sequential, not simultaneous. It had taken 8 months because the Consortium had processed the colony's population in batches of approximately 6,000 per day. That meant the early batches, the ones extracted in the first weeks, had been walking through the colony as shells for months while their neighbors went about their lives. The civic administration had not noticed immediately because the post-transfer bodies exhibited basic motor function. They ate in a mechanical way when food was placed in front of them. They sat. They walked prescribed routes, home to workplace and back, along paths their bodies had memorized before their minds were taken. But they did not speak. They did not respond to questions. They did not recognize their families. A schoolteacher extracted in the third week would have stood at the front of her classroom for 6 more months, present and silent, while the students around her, not yet scheduled for extraction, tried to understand what had changed. A father extracted in the second month would have sat at the breakfast table every morning, lifting a cup to his lips, while his daughter told him about her day and received no answer. The colony's complaint logs, which Ash's team recovered intact, showed a rising tide of reports: unresponsive neighbor, colleague no longer communicates, parent exhibits vacant affect, that accelerated through the middle months and then abruptly stopped. They stopped because the people filing the complaints had themselves been processed. By the 7th month, most of the colony was residue. By the 8th, the extraction was complete. The complaint system had no one left to write to it. That was the thing that settled in my chest and did not leave. Not the scale, not the number. The 6 months of silence in a classroom. The daughter reaching across the breakfast table. The slow, creeping wrongness of a colony where the people were still there and the people were already gone, and no one understood why until they, too, were drained. And then there was no one left to understand anything. I asked Care if the Consortium had understood what they were doing. She said they had. She said the project file's technical specifications demonstrated a thorough understanding of human neural architecture, detailed enough that the extraction had been optimized for minimal data loss, which required a precise model of human consciousness, its emotional architecture, its memory consolidation pathways, its sensory integration networks. They knew what a human mind was. They knew what it meant to remove one. They had simply determined that the recording was the valuable component, and the body was the packaging. I asked her why. She said the Consortium's cultural files, recovered alongside the project data, described a civilization that had exhausted its own experiential capacity approximately 4,000 years ago. The Consortium's population had been declining not because of disease or war or resource scarcity, but because its citizens had, over millennia, experienced everything their own culture could produce. Every sensation, every narrative, every form of art and thought and emotion available within the Consortium's own species had been lived, recorded, catalogued, and replayed until it carried no further value. They were a civilization that had consumed itself. Every novel was a repetition. Every composition was a variation. Every experience was a memory of a memory of a memory, worn smooth by familiarity until it produced nothing. And so they had turned outward, not for territory, not for resources, but for experience, fresh experience, other species' lives. They collected them the way a collector acquires rare manuscripts, carefully, comprehensively, and with the serene conviction that preservation was a gift, that the collected should be grateful to have their brief, fragile existences made permanent in the Consortium's vaults. The Remembrance Protocol was not their first, it was their 47th. 46 other species, 46 other populations, harvested, archived, and filed over 4,000 years. The Consortium's collection vaults held the complete experiential record of sentient beings from across their region of space. Billions of lives, reduced to data, organized by species and date of acquisition, available for recreational playback by Consortium citizens looking for a novel afternoon. I received the complete intelligence package on a Thursday 93 days after Saren's Reach had gone silent. I read it at my desk at Ashfall Station with a cup of coffee that went cold while I turned pages. When I finished, I closed the file. I sat for 11 minutes. I looked at the wall. The wall was gray. It had no answers. I did not need answers. I needed a number. Then I drafted the authorization request for the response. The request went to Earth's Combined Fleet Authority. It was 9 pages long. It described the offense, the evidence, the capability assessment of the consortium's military infrastructure, and the proposed response. The proposed response was the total dismantlement of the Vandren Consortium's governance apparatus, collection infrastructure, and archival systems across all 31 of its occupied systems. The authorization was granted in 4 days. I was told later that the combined fleet authorities' deliberation had taken 11 minutes. The remaining time was administrative processing. The response was designated the voided record. I named it myself. The consortium had built a record of our people. The record would be voided, not returned, not negotiated, not amended. Voided, every catalog entry, every archived mind, every exhibit, every storage array, every governance structure that had authorized, funded, overseen, or benefited from the harvesting of sentient experience. All of it, gone. Not because destruction was the goal, but because the framework itself, the premise that a mind could be property, that a life could be filed, that consciousness was a commodity to be transferred and consumed, was the thing that had to end. You do not reform a system built on that premise. You remove it entirely, or you accept it, and Earth did not accept it. The construction began at Ashfall Station 17 days after authorization. Ashfall was a deep logistics facility in a dead system, 4 relay hops from the nearest populated corridor. No strategic value, no traffic, no reason for anyone to look. It had been built during the Meridian expansion as a forward repair dock, and had since been downgraded to a reserve depot with a skeleton maintenance crew and 3 operational fabrication bays. I requisitioned it, upgraded its fabrication capacity to full wartime output with 9 additional modular assembly lines shipped in from the Corvin yards, and began building 528,000 warships. I need to say that number plainly because the number is the response. The consortium's entire military capability, such as it was, consisted of approximately 900 system patrol vessels, none heavier than a light cruiser, most of them automated traffic control platforms repurposed from commercial service. They were not a military civilization. They did not need to be. No one had ever had reason to attack a species whose primary activity was archiving other species' memories for recreational use. 900 patrol ships. Earth's answer was 528,000 warships. 1 task group for each consortium system, each task group large enough to secure every facility, every vault, every governance node in its assigned system simultaneously, with no gaps, no delays, no possibility that a single collection facility would remain operational long enough for its contents to be transferred or hidden. The disproportion was not an error, it was the message. I spent 14 months at Ashfall Station overseeing the construction. The work was methodical. There was no urgency in it, no breathless race against a ticking clock, no desperate midnight shifts fueled by rage. The consortium was not going anywhere. They had been operating the Remembrance Protocol for 4,000 years. They were patient, and so were we. The difference was that their patience was the patience of collectors waiting for the next acquisition. Ours was the patience of people building something that would never need to be built again. The days at Ashfall had a rhythm. I woke at 500, reviewed the overnight production reports, walked the primary assembly floor at 600 while the shift change brought in fresh crews. The fabrication bays ran around the clock, 3 shifts, 8 hours each, no exceptions, no overtime. I had prohibited overtime in the first week. Rage works in overtime. Discipline does not. I wanted every hull plate welded by a technician who had slept 8 hours and eaten 3 meals and whose hands were steady because they were rested, not because they were numb. By month 4, the assembly lines were producing warships at a rate of 47 per day across the 9 fabrication nodes. By month 8, the rate had increased to 61. The ships were not ornate. They were not the flagships of a grand fleet. They were standardized combat platforms, reliable, maintainable, produced in volume. cruiserweight vessels with heavy EMP suites, electronic warfare arrays, and marine deployment capacity. The design was Ash's. He had stripped the standard hull configuration down to its essential systems, eliminated every component that did not serve the mission profile, and produced a warship that could be built in 9 days, crewed by 40, and operated for 6 months without resupply. It was not elegant. It was sufficient. Sufficiency was the design requirement. Captain Ash served as my chief of staff throughout the construction period. He managed the logistics, the hull production schedules, the weapons integration timelines, the crew assignment rotations, the supply chain coordination across 9 fabrication nodes feeding into Ashfall's assembly docks. He compiled the target packages for each of the 31 task groups, cross-referencing our intelligence on the Consortium's collection infrastructure with orbital survey data that our long-range reconnaissance assets had been gathering since month 3. Every vault, every processing center, every governance office, every distribution node mapped, assessed, and assigned to a decommissioning team. In month 6, Ash presented me with the complete target list for the campaign. It filled a secure database with over 14,000 entries, individual facilities across 31 systems, each one tagged with its function, its estimated contents, its staff complement, its structural specifications, and the engineering team assigned to decommission it. We reviewed it together in my office, scrolling through entry after entry, and neither of us spoke for most of the session. The scope of what the Consortium had built was staggering, not in the military sense, not as a threat, but as an infrastructure of acquisition. They had constructed an entire civilization around the harvesting, processing, storage, and consumption of other species' lived experience. It was their economy, their culture, their reason for being. And we were going to take it apart, facility by facility, component by component, until nothing remained but empty buildings and a population that would have to find a new reason to exist. Ash did not ask me, in 14 months, whether the response was proportionate. He did not ask me whether diplomacy had been considered. He had read the same file I had. He had seen the same quality assurance appendix, the same 99.9988% fidelity rate, the same recommendation that the protocol be applied to other human settlements of comparable population density and cooperative civic infrastructure. He had seen the disposal schedule. He had seen the 3 additional colonies the Consortium had identified for acquisition, the technician teams already assigned, the mobile thermal reduction units already manufactured and staged. Ash was not a man who required things explained to him twice. In the 11th month, I received a communication from the Consortium's Diplomatic Liaison Office, a polite, formal inquiry about increased human naval activity in the Varanthe corridor. The inquiry referenced routine border monitoring observations and requested clarification on the nature of the activity. They did not know about Ashfall Station. They did not know about the 528,000 warships being assembled 4 relay hops away. They were curious, in the mild way of a civilization that had not been threatened in 7 millennia, about some additional ship traffic near their borders. I did not respond to the inquiry. I forwarded it to Ash, who filed it in the operational archive and continued compiling target packages. 11 days later, the Consortium's liaison office sent a follow-up, slightly more formal, noting that the lack of response was atypical of human diplomatic protocol. Ash filed that one too. On the 411th day, the last warship cleared Ashfall's assembly cradle and took its position in the formation grid. I stood on the command deck of the Resolute Terminus, the fleet's flagship, a dreadnought-class vessel 3 kilometers from bow to stern, built in the first month and serving as Ashfall's command platform throughout the construction, and looked at the tactical display. 528,000 blue markers, arranged in 31 task groups, spread across the display wall in a pattern that looked, from a distance, like a star chart. Each marker was a warship. Each task group was a system. Each system was a piece of the consortium that would be dismantled. I gave the order to proceed. The fleet departed Ashfall Station in staggered formations over the course of 9 hours, the 31 task groups peeling off the formation grid in sequence, each one entering its assigned relay corridor at a calculated interval to prevent congestion at the transit nodes. I watched from the command deck as the tactical display emptied in stages, each departing task group switching from blue to amber as it entered transit, then disappearing from the local display entirely. By the time the last task group, the one assigned to the consortium's capital system, Vandren Actual, which I commanded personally, entered its corridor, Ashfall Station's assembly docks were empty for the first time in 14 months. The fabrication bays were powered down. The modular assembly lines were retracted. The station's skeleton crew, the same maintenance detachment that had been there before I requisitioned the facility, resumed their posts. Ashfall returned to what it had been, a forgotten depot in a dead system, unremarkable and quiet. The transit to the consortium's border took 6 days through 4 relay corridors. I spent those days reviewing the final operational briefs for each task group, confirming the decommissioning procedures with each group commander, and ensuring the civilian protection protocols were clearly understood. No bombardment of population centers. No interference with medical, agricultural, or educational infrastructure. No harm to non-combatant individuals under any circumstances. The voided record's rules of engagement were as precise as its target list. Every facility designated for decommissioning was identified by coordinates, structural footprint, and function, and nothing outside that designation was to be touched. I required each group commander to acknowledge these rules individually, by name, before their task group entered consortium space. We did not announce ourselves. We did not issue a warning. We did not transmit a declaration of intent or a statement of grievance or a formal notice of hostilities. There was nothing to negotiate. The consortium had archived 1.4 million human minds, filed the bodies as waste, and scheduled 3 more colonies for the same procedure. There was no version of that act that could be discussed, mitigated, apologized for, or walked back. There was only the response. We entered the consortium's outermost system, a minor collection node designated Vandren's Reach in their administrative charts, at 3:42 local time on day 1 of the campaign. The system's patrol complement was 11 automated vessels. They transmitted a standard border challenge query in the consortium's administrative language. Our electronic warfare suite answered with a blanket suppression field that shut down every consortium communications array in the system within 90 seconds. The 11 patrol vessels were disabled by targeted electromagnetic bursts, their propulsion cores powered down, their navigation systems locked, their automated response protocols overridden. No shots fired. No casualties. The system was ours in 4 minutes. The pattern held. 31 systems. 26 days. The consortium's military infrastructure, such as it was, offered no meaningful resistance. Their patrol vessels were designed for traffic management, not combat. Their defensive platforms were antiquated. Some of them predated the consortium's last territorial conflict by 7,000 years, their targeting systems calibrated for threats that had gone extinct before humanity had learned to work iron. We disabled them with the efficiency of a maintenance crew clearing derelict hardware. The consortium's civilian population, approximately 2.3 billion across their 31 systems, was not targeted. We did not bombard their cities. We did not blockade their supply lines. We did not interfere with their medical infrastructure or their food production or their power grids or their educational systems. The voided record was not a war of extermination. It was a dismantlement. What we dismantled was the collection. Every collection vault, every archival storage facility, every neurolimprint processing center, every administrative office that had overseen, approved, or cataloged the acquisition of sentient experience. every governance node that had authorized the Remembrance Protocol or any of its 46 predecessors. The Consortium's entire cultural collection apparatus. The thing they had built their civilization around for 4,000 years. The thing that had replaced their own exhausted creativity. The thing that gave them reason to continue existing, was identified, cataloged by our intelligence teams, and systematically decommissioned. Decommissioned is the word I used in the operational orders, and it is the word I will use here because it is precise. We did not destroy the vaults in a rage. We did not detonate them from orbit. We sent engineering teams into every facility, documented its contents, recorded its inventory for Earth's War Crimes Archive, and then dismantled it, physically, methodically, component by component. The storage arrays were powered down and removed. The archival media were extracted and cataloged. The environmental systems were shut down in sequence. The structural components were disassembled and left stacked in the facility's loading area, inert and cataloged, for the Consortium's own disposal. I observed the decommissioning of one vault personally, Archival Complex 12 on Vandren Actual, the Consortium's primary world. It was a large facility, built into a hillside above the capital settlement, with a facade of polished stone that caught the morning light. Inside, the corridors were quiet and climate-controlled, the walls lined with storage arrays that hummed at a frequency just below the threshold of human hearing. The engineering team, 32 specialists under Commander Strand, worked through the facility in a grid pattern, room by room, array by array. Each storage unit was powered down, its contents logged in the War Crimes database, and its archival media extracted and placed in a null-write container for erasure processing. The work took 11 hours. Commander Strand's team spoke in low voices, called out unit numbers and inventory codes, and moved with the practiced efficiency of people performing a task they had rehearsed 100 times. There was no anger in the room. There was no satisfaction. There was the work. In one chamber of Archival Complex 12, the storage arrays were organized by species rather than by acquisition date. The chamber held the complete experiential record of a species the Consortium designated Acquisition 14, a pre-spacefaring civilization from a world in the outer reach, harvested approximately 2,200 years earlier. The catalog noted that the species had possessed no means of interstellar communication and had been unaware of the Consortium's existence until the extraction teams arrived. The acquisition had taken 3 years. The population harvested was approximately 340 million. The catalog assessment praised the species' vivid chromatic perception and layered communal memory structures, and noted that imprints from Acquisition 14 remained among the most popular in the Consortium's recreational playback network. 340 million. A species that had never left its own world, that had never known it was not alone in the universe, drained and cataloged and made available for entertainment. And no one had come for them. No one had sent 528,000 warships. No one had voided the record. I stood in that chamber while Commander Strand's team powered down the arrays, and I thought about Acquisition 14, and about the 45 others who had come before us. And I understood that the voided record was not only for Saren's reach. It was for all of them, every species the Consortium had harvested, every population that had been too small, too isolated, too unaware to object. We were there because we had the capability to be there, and because no one else had. The neural imprint data, every recorded mind from every harvested species, including our own 1,407,223 colonists, was identified, documented, and erased. I want to be clear about that word, erased, not recovered, not transferred to a human-compatible system, not returned to some surrogate body, not preserved in a memorial archive, erased, overwritten with null data, gone. Because they were not people. They had not been people from the moment the transfer was completed. They were recordings, data files that contained the complete sensory experiential record of a human being, filed in a storage array alongside 46 other species worth of harvested consciousness, available for playback by Consortium citizens who wanted to know what it felt like to be a schoolteacher in a colony on a temperate world in the Varanthi corridor, or what it felt like to hold a newborn in a hospital's third wing, or what it felt like to reach across a breakfast table and find your father's eyes empty and his hand still warm. I erased them because keeping them would have meant accepting the Consortium's premise that a mind is a transferable object, that consciousness is a file to be stored and played and owned. Earth does not accept that premise. A mind belongs to the body it lives in. When the body is gone, the mind is gone. What the Consortium had in its vaults was not 1.4 million people. It was 1.4 million recordings of the last moments a person existed before they were drained. Preserving those recordings would not have honored the dead. It would have completed the Consortium's work, kept the stolen experiences in circulation, maintained the collection, validated the entire framework that had made the theft possible. So we erased them, every recording, every species, every harvested mind in every vault across 31 systems, 4,000 years of collected consciousness, deleted from the storage arrays and overwritten with null data. The vault stood empty when we were done, not ruined, not burned, just empty. Clean rooms with powered-down equipment and blank storage media, cataloged and sealed. In one vault on the Consortium's primary world, Vandren Actual, our engineering teams found a wing dedicated exclusively to what the Consortium classified as high-value dramatic content. These were imprints selected for the intensity of their emotional experience. The catalog entries described them with the language of connoisseurs: remarkable grief density, sustained terror with high sensory resolution, complex attachment loss sequence with exceptional olfactory detail. Some of the imprints in the high-value wing were from the final weeks of the Saren's Reach extraction, when the remaining colonists, the ones who had watched their families and neighbors go silent, who had filed complaints that went unanswered, who had begun to understand that something was being done to them, had been extracted while experiencing the full weight of that understanding. Their terror was the product. Their dawning comprehension that they were being harvested was the premium content. The engineering team that processed that wing submitted their decommissioning report in the standard format. The report was 3 pages long and entirely factual. I read it at 200 on day 19 of the campaign. Then I set it down and sat in the dark of my quarters for a long time, and when I was done sitting, I returned to the command deck and continued the operation. On day 9, the Consortium's governing body, the Curatorial Senate, transmitted a formal communication to the Resolute Terminus. I received it on the command deck. The communication was translated by our linguistic team and presented to me in written form. It was 11 pages long. I will summarize it in one sentence. The Curatorial Senate expressed willingness to return the archived human minds and to negotiate terms for the cessation of Earth's military operations. I read the full document, then I drafted a response. My response was 3 sentences long. The archived minds are recordings, not people. There is nothing to return. The dismantlement will continue. Captain Ash, standing at my shoulder, read the response before I transmitted it. He said nothing. There was nothing to say. The Consortium was offering to give back something that no longer existed as what it had been. They were offering to hand us data files and call it restitution. They were offering mercy on their terms. The terms of a civilization that believed consciousness was property, that a mind could be removed from a body and stored and returned, and the transaction would balance. Those terms were what we were there to end. The Senate transmitted a second communication on day 14. It was shorter. It offered unconditional surrender. It offered to dismantle the collection infrastructure voluntarily. It offered reparations in any form Earth wished to specify. It asked only that the consortium be permitted to continue to exist as a political entity. My response was one sentence: the dismantlement is not contingent on your cooperation. On day 17, a delegation of 3 consortium officials arrived at the Resolute terminus under a transit-safe corridor we had established for civilian evacuation coordination. Their lead representative introduced herself as Curatorial Overseer Selvethan. She asked to speak with me privately. I agreed. We sat across from each other in the flag briefing room, a windowless compartment with a metal table and 4 chairs and nothing on the walls. Ash stood by the door. The consortium officials were the first of their kind I had seen in person. They were tall, taller than humans by a third, with elongated limbs and skin that had a faint translucence, as though the species had evolved in low-light conditions and never fully adapted to brighter environments. Their eyes were large and dark and very still. They moved with the careful deliberation of people who had never needed to hurry, who had never been threatened, who had lived for 11,000 years in a civilization that had forgotten what it meant to be afraid. Selvethan spoke in measured, precise terms. She said the consortium recognized that a misunderstanding had occurred. She said the remembrance protocol had been conducted according to the consortium's established cultural acquisition procedures, which had been in continuous operation for 4,000 years without objection. She said those procedures had been applied to 46 species prior to humanity, and in every prior case, the acquired species had either been non-spacefaring and therefore unable to object, or had been contacted afterward and had accepted the archival as a form of preservation, a way for their culture to persist beyond the lifespan of their individual members. She did not say how many of those 46 species had accepted the archival willingly, and how many had simply lacked the capability to do anything else. The distinction, I suspected, did not exist in the consortium's framework. She said the consortium understood that humanity viewed the matter differently. She said the consortium was prepared to make adjustments to its procedures going forward. I let her finish, then I asked her one question. What happened to the bodies? She paused, not because she did not understand the question, because the question to her was irrelevant. The bodies were packaging. The bodies were the container the experience had been stored in before the transfer. Asking about the bodies was like asking about the shipping crate after the contents had been unpacked and placed on the shelf. The post-archival biological residue was processed according to standard disposal protocols, she said. Category 7, subcategory organic matter, thermal reduction. The process is efficient and produces no environmental contamination. The disposal was completed within 14 days of the final extraction cycle. I looked at her for a long time. Her dark eyes were steady. There was no malice in them. There was no cruelty. There was not even indifference, not in the way a human would understand it. She simply did not comprehend that the body and the mind were the same thing, that the packaging and the contents were inseparable, that you could not drain a person and keep the recording and call the transaction complete. To her, the 1.4 million colonists of Saren's Reach had been preserved. Their experiences would endure in the consortium's collection for millennia. The flesh they had inhabited was a temporary vessel, and its disposal was a logistical detail. And the only error the consortium had made was failing to file the appropriate diplomatic notice with Earth's colonial administration before commencing the project. She was not evil. That was the thing I understood, sitting across from her in that bare room with the metal table between us. She was not malicious. She was something worse. She was certain. She believed, with the unshakable conviction of 11,000 years of cultural continuity, that what the consortium had done was right, that preserving experience was a gift, that the collected should be grateful, that the disposal of the body was no more significant than the disposal of a jar after the contents have been decanted. She would never understand why Earth had sent 528,000 warships. She would never understand what she had done wrong. The dismantlement will continue, I said. She asked if there was anything the consortium could offer. I said no. She asked if there was any framework under which the consortium could continue to exist. I said yes. The consortium's civilian population would not be harmed. Their agricultural systems, their medical infrastructure, their residential zones, their schools, their hospitals, all untouched. But the collection was over. The governance apparatus that had authorized and administered 47 remembrance protocols across 4,000 years was being removed. The curatorial senate was being dissolved. The administrative hierarchy that had overseen the acquisition, storage, and recreational distribution of harvested sentient experience was being dismantled, position by position, office by office, system by system. The consortium as a political entity, the thing that collected minds, would cease to exist. The population would remain. The structure would not. Selvithan sat very still for a long time after I finished. I do not think she had ever been told no. I do not think any representative of the consortium had been told no in 4,000 years. They had operated in a region of space where their cultural authority was unquestioned, where their acquisition protocols were accepted or ignored, where no species they had harvested had possessed the fleet strength to object. They had encountered humanity and seen a cooperative civic infrastructure, and a population of 1.4 million, and a university and a children's hospital, and they had seen archival material. "You are dismantling 11,000 years of civilization," she said. "No," I said, "I am dismantling 4,000 years of theft." She left the resolute terminus under the same transit-safe corridor. The delegation returned to consortium space. The dismantlement continued. By day 22, the collection infrastructure was gone. Every vault across 31 systems had been entered, documented, emptied, and sealed. The engineering teams had processed over 14,000 individual facilities, archive halls, imprint processing centers, distribution nodes, playback chambers, curatorial offices, administrative complexes, acquisition planning stations, disposal logistics centers. Each one was cataloged in Earth's War Crimes Archive with a complete inventory of its contents, the species represented in its holdings, the approximate population harvested, the date and method of acquisition, and the disposal procedures applied to the bodies. The archive would be maintained in perpetuity, not as a collection, as evidence. On day 24, the curatorial senate formally dissolved itself. The act was transmitted to the resolute terminus as a single-page document, signed by the 7 remaining members of the Senate. I received it, logged it, and forwarded it to Earth's combined fleet authority as confirmation that the governance dismantlement phase was complete. On day 26, the last task group reported its system cleared. I stood on the command deck and watched the tactical display update 31 green markers, each representing a consortium system in which the collection apparatus had been fully decommissioned, the governance hierarchy removed, and the civilian population confirmed unharmed. The display was clean. The campaign was over. 528,000 warships, 26 days, 0 civilian casualties in the consortium's population. Earth's operational losses, 41 personnel, all from engineering accidents during vault decommissioning operations, a structural collapse in a subterranean archive on Vandren's secondary world, a power cell failure during a storage array extraction on a facility in the outer reach, a transport shuttle malfunction during a crew rotation. No combat deaths, because there had been no combat. The consortium had possessed nothing capable of fighting us, and we had possessed nothing resembling a desire to fight. We had come to take apart a machine, and we had taken it apart. The voided record withdrew from consortium space on day 28. I ordered a final patrol sweep of each system, one pass to confirm that no collection facility had been missed, no governance node overlooked, no storage array left powered. The sweeps returned clean across all 31 systems. The last patrol cleared the Consortium's border at 1847 on day 29. As each task group exited, its markers on the tactical display shifted from operational amber to transit blue, and then, one by one, disappeared from the Consortium sector and reappeared on the return corridors. The transit home took 7 days. The fleet dispersed to its staging points. Most of the ships would be decommissioned themselves within the year, their purpose served, their hulls repurposed for logistics and patrol duty in the Varanthi corridor. The Resolute terminus would remain in service, but its role would change. It had been built as a command platform for a campaign that was now over. What it became afterward was administrative, a mobile coordination center for the follow-up operations that the Combined Fleet Authority had already authorized, the monitoring of Consortium space to ensure the collection infrastructure was not rebuilt, and the continued documentation of the 47 remembrance protocols for the permanent archive. I spent most of the transit in my quarters, reviewing the war crimes archive that my intelligence teams had compiled. 47 species, billions of individuals across 4 millennia. The Consortium had harvested entire civilizations, drained them, recorded them, filed them, and made them available for recreational consumption by a species that had run out of its own experiences and had decided, with the calm certainty of collectors, that other species' lives were there for the taking. The archive included the Consortium's own internal assessments of each harvested species. The assessments were written in the language of curators, clinical, appreciative, taxonomic. One species was noted for the exceptional richness of its fear responses, particularly during the terminal awareness phase. Another was valued for its complex social bonding narratives, particularly the parent-offspring attachment sequences, which produce sustained emotional resonance across multiple playback cycles. The assessment of the human population of Saren's Reach praised the remarkable density of sensory-emotional experience per individual unit, and recommended priority acquisition of additional human populations due to the species' unusually high experiential throughput relative to biological complexity. Experiential throughput relative to biological complexity. That was what they saw when they looked at us. A favorable ratio. A species that felt a great deal in a short lifespan, which made us efficient to harvest. I closed the file. I did not open it again. There is a question that people ask me when this subject arises, which it does less often now than it once did. The question is whether the response was proportionate. Whether 528,000 warships and the total dismantlement of an 11,000-year civilization was a reasonable answer to the harvesting of one colony. I will answer it the way I answered it then. I answered it in the operational order that authorized the voided record. I answered it in the 9-page request I submitted to the Combined Fleet Authority. I answered it when I refused the curatorial senate's offer to return the archived mines. I answered it when I sat across from Overseer Selvethan and told her the dismantlement would continue. The answer is that it was not about one colony. The Remembrance Protocol's Quality Assurance Appendix recommended the procedure for application to other human settlements of comparable population density and cooperative civic infrastructure. The Consortium had identified 3 additional colonies that met the criteria. The acquisition schedules had been drafted. The technician teams had been assigned. The mobile thermal reduction units had been manufactured and staged at forward logistics points. Saren's Reach was not an isolated incident. It was the first entry in a series. 3 more colonies were next. After that, the Consortium's assessment noted, a broader survey of human-occupied space was warranted to identify further candidates. If we had responded with diplomacy, with sanctions, with trade restrictions, with a sternly worded resolution in some interstellar forum, the Consortium would have adjusted its procedures, filed the appropriate diplomatic notices, and continued. They had been doing this for 4,000 years. They had harvested 46 species. They did not understand the objection, because to them there was nothing to object to. They were preserving experience. They were curating consciousness. They were performing in their own assessment a service. You do not negotiate with that. You do not reform it. You do not impose conditions and hope the conditions hold. You remove the apparatus entirely. Every vault, every governance node, every administrative structure that made the harvesting possible. And you do it at a scale that leaves no ambiguity about what will happen if the apparatus is rebuilt. The Consortium civilian population endures. They still occupy their 31 systems. Their agricultural and medical infrastructure was never touched. Their children still attend their schools and their elderly still receive their care. But the collection is gone. The vaults are empty. The curatorial senate no longer exists. The administrative apparatus that authorized and administered the harvesting of sentient experience for 4,000 years has been removed from the structure of their civilization like a tumor from a body. And the body continues to live, diminished and changed, without the thing that had defined it. I do not know what they will become. For 4,000 years, the collection was their purpose, the reason their civilization continued to function, the engine that drove their economy, the source of whatever passed for culture among a species that had exhausted its own. Without it, they are a population of 2.3 billion on 31 worlds with functioning infrastructure and no national project, no animating idea, no reason to persist beyond the biological imperative to continue. Perhaps they will find one. Perhaps they will build something that does not require the harvesting of other species' consciousness to sustain itself. Or perhaps they will continue to decline, as they were already declining before the collection began, and fade into the kind of silence that old empires fade into when the thing that held them together is removed. That is not my concern. My concern was the machine, and the machine is gone. In Earth's War Crimes Archive, the 47 remembrance protocols are documented in full. Every species, every population, every individual where records permitted identification. The archive runs to 4.7 million pages. It is maintained by a dedicated staff at the Combined Fleet Authority's Historical Records Division. It is not classified. Anyone can read it. Anyone can see what was done, and to whom, and by whom, and for how long, and what the answer was. The entry for Saren's Reach lists 1,407,223 names. Everyone was recovered from the colony's civic registry, which the Consortium had not bothered to delete because the registry to them was irrelevant, a list of packaging labels, not a record of people. Our forensic teams cross-referenced the registry with the colony's residential databases, its school enrollment records, its hospital files, its employment logs. Every name was matched to an address, a household, an occupation, and age. The schoolteacher who had stood silent in her classroom for 6 months was named Alida. She was 41 years old. She had taught secondary mathematics for 16 years. Her students had filed a complaint about her unresponsiveness 3 weeks after her extraction, and the complaint had been logged in the colony's administrative system and never acted on, because by then the administrative staff who would have investigated were themselves post-archival biological residue, sitting at their desks, breathing, waiting. Alida is the 4,221st name in the archive entry for Saren's Reach. She is listed alongside her home address, her date of extraction, and the catalog number the Consortium assigned to her neural sensory imprint. The catalog number has been voided. Every catalog number has been voided. That is what the voided record means. I am sometimes asked whether I regret erasing the imprints, whether there was value in the recordings, whether they constituted some form of preservation, whether destroying them was an act of loss rather than an act of justice. I do not regret it. A recording of Alida's last morning, the tea, the walk to the school, the faces of her students, the feel of chalk on the board, the light through the window, is not Alida. It is a theft made permanent. Keeping it would have meant agreeing with the Consortium, that the recording was the thing that mattered, that the woman was incidental, that what she experienced could be separated from who she was and stored on a shelf, and played for the entertainment of strangers who had run out of their own capacity to feel. Alidatan was not an experience. She was a person. She lived in a body on a world in the Varanthi corridor, and she taught mathematics to children who looked forward to her class, and she set a table for dinner one evening with 4 plates and 4 glasses and a bottle of local wine, and she never sat down. The Vandren Consortium reduced her to a data file and burned the rest. We cannot bring her back. We cannot undo what was done. But we can ensure that the machine that did it no longer exists, and we can ensure that her name, not her catalog number, her name, is the thing that endures. The voided record has been entered in Earth's military registry as a completed operation. Its documentation fills 11,000 pages. The tactical summary is 3 paragraphs long, 31 systems, 26 days, 528,000 warships, 0 combat engagements, total dismantlement of the Vandren Consortium's governance and collection apparatus, all archival holdings erased and overwritten, civilian population unharmed. 3 paragraphs for 11,000 years. The archive holds 1,407,223 names, not imprints, not catalog numbers, not experiential throughput ratios. Names, matched to addresses, to families, to classrooms and hospital wards and dinner tables and lives that were lived in bodies on a world that is still there, still turning, still growing grain in fields that no one harvests. The Consortium archived our people and called it preservation. We voided the record and called it what it was.